Good morning and welcome to Sunday Sermons Live. I am the Reverend Sarah Anaskevich, and today I want to talk to you about one of the readings that I preached on in this Sunday service for my own congregation. So right now, in the cycle of the bits of the Bible that we read on a regular basis, we are reading about Jesus post-death, post-resurrection, because there's still a couple of things that he does when he reappears to all of his students and his friends and family. And so we're focusing in on this because in the Christian cycle of calendar, we just celebrated Easter Day. Well, the Western Church just celebrated Easter Day, and the Orthodox Church just celebrated Easter Day. But the festival, the season of Easter is 50 days long, so we just keep talking about it. So the particular story we focus in on happens in Luke, and it's the story of these two previously unmentioned students of Jesus. One remains unmentioned, so it's probably a woman. Just how ancient writings work, it was probably a woman. And the other one does have a name, and so it's very likely that they were a married couple traveling. So the dude's name is Cleopas. And so I'm just going to call him Mr. and Mrs. Cleopas, because that's probably what it was. So this dude and his wife, they're traveling from Jerusalem to several miles away to a little town called Emmaus. And on the road, they meet up with this stranger as they're walking. And they have been talking about all the crazy things that had just happened and how Jesus had died. And it was so insane. And what is the meaning of life? And is everything he said true or false? Does this negate everything? Is God dead? I mean, they're talking about the big questions that were on their mind. And they're talking about some big questions that maybe are on our minds. What does it mean when the world is thrown into pandemic terror? Is God dead? What will it mean for my life from this point on? Is God present? And so this stranger on the road, whom they do not recognize, this is key to the whole story. They do not recognize this stranger on the road. Spoiler alert, it's Jesus. So they don't recognize this stranger on the road. And he's like, hey, what you talking about? And they're like, do you live under a rock, dude? Seriously, where have you been? All of Jerusalem is talking about it. Yeah. And he's like, well, tell me more. And so, they tell him a little more. And then this stranger on the road goes on to explain to them with eloquent wisdom and perfect clarity, how Jesus, as a person, as Son of God, fits into the scope of all the history they are aware of. And they have perfect clarity, like they finally understand. And this is an important thing to consider because Jesus often confused his followers, like while he was still kicking around pre-death. He often confused those who were just passing by or trying to trick him, like rhetorically speaking. But even his students, the comprehension rate was really low. Like it was more like 20% rather than 80%, which now if you're thinking of like modern teaching methods, this is not a good comprehension rate. This is not the mark of a good teacher. But if you're thinking about lifelong learning, then what we know from different methods of pedagogy that have been researched and different from the marketing world, we know that you actually have to say something to someone like 8 times for it to sink into their noggin. And that's if they're capable of grasping it at the time. And so I don't think about like really competent teachers when I think about Jesus. I think about parents trying to teach their children concepts for the very first time. Brand new concepts like don't hit your brother. And concepts like stop hitting your brother are really hard to grasp when every fiber of your being wants you to hit your brother because your brother is an annoying git. And it seems like it would be a really good idea to hit your brother. And yet you've got this person telling you don't hit your brother, and your comprehension rate of the grand and ethical teaching, don't hit your brother, is less than 20% at first. But it gets better, right? The situation always gets better, but it doesn't always take the first time it's mentioned. It doesn't always take the second, third, or fourth time it's mentioned. It sometimes takes a lot of time for us to really embrace the harder life lessons. And sometimes we have to feel the negative consequences of our harder life lessons. So back to Jesus. So when he was kicking around, he often didn't have, when he was kicking around pre-death, he often didn't have like an 80% comprehension rate with his students because he wasn't teaching them always things they were ready to learn. He was often teaching them things that they wanted to learn, but that didn't mean that they were capable of mastering it the next day. And that too, I liken to the idea of learning an instrument. You can desperately want to learn an instrument, but just because you desperately want to learn it and you go out and you make yourself a student of a really, really fine teacher and master of that instrument, it doesn't mean that you're going to practice for 12 hours and get the instrument. And gosh, if you're on a brass instrument, you're not even going to make a decent sound for the first 12 hours. You're not going to make a decent sound for much longer than that. And so there's this sense sometimes in the modern world that if we want to know a thing, we'll just tell me the thing and then I'll know it. But it doesn't, learning and teaching doesn't always work that way. There's a sense in the modern world that, well, you know, if you just have an inquiring mind, you can learn whatever you want. That is true. But it might also take an infusion of time and resources that you may not be prepared to put toward the endeavor. So Jesus gathered to himself students that were ready. They were ready to hear his message. That didn't necessarily mean that they were going to master it in his lifetime. And they didn't. But that's okay. There's no judgment. Some of the things Jesus said were really hard, and we're still working on them now. So it is important to realize that Jesus often confused his own students during his lifetime, pre-death. And so when he came back and he was able to say things maybe in a new way, maybe he had a new skill set post-death, but maybe they had learned a hard lesson, which, you know, sometimes helps us in the learning process. Maybe they had learned a hard lesson during his death that helped them hear better, understand better. Because, I don't know about you, but I have had to learn some of my life lessons the hard way. And it's not fun. And it's not pleasant. And I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And yet, learning it the hard way, I really, really learned it. There's always a very clear distinction before the hard lesson and after the hard lesson. And after the hard lesson, I was a different person. And so it's possible that dude and his wife, Cleopas and his wife, had just learned a hard lesson and were ready to hear things in a new way. So anyway, So the stranger on the road, whom they do not recognize, is explaining to them all the things they never understood that Jesus had said. And he's making it so clear. And so they get, really close to their town. And the stranger makes like he's going to go on and continue walking. But it's like, it's getting late. It's not quite nightfall, but it's dangerous to be on the roads at night. And it's not like you can get to the next town on the road before nightfall. So they're like, stay with us, stay with us, stay with us. A little bit of hospitality. And he's like, okay. So he goes in with him. And here's the crazy part. Well, it's a post-death revelation. And so there's really no lack of crazy here. But so they go in, and we're not given a whole lot of details because the Gospels, these ancient accounts, they don't always tell the story in a way that would be satisfying to a modern audience. So they go into a house and they sit down to dinner. Now, this is the ancient Middle East. Dinner does not just happen. You don't order it from Grubhub. You don't get it from Uber Eats. Like, it takes time and effort and dedication for someone, usually a woman, to make dinner. And so we've got no idea in the story. We don't know if Mrs. Cleopas is like, all right, I'll be ready in 2 hours. Or, she was probably quite advanced in this whole dinner making concept. So if the kitchen was well stocked, it might only take her 60 or 90 minutes. But we don't know. We don't know if they've arrived at the home of a friend or a relative who's like, good, we've been cooking all day. We're ready for your dinner. We don't know. But we know that they arrive at a place, they arrive at a house, they sit down to dinner with a stranger, conceivably other people as well, who knows, the story doesn't say. And the standard things happen at dinner. Like you say a blessing, because, this is a good Jewish household, you say a blessing. And in this case, they invited the stranger to say the blessing. And you've got a big loaf of bread, and so you break the bread into pieces. And then you start sharing the food that you have. And so the stranger said the blessing. And the stranger broke the bread. And in that moment, perhaps a moment of extreme familiarity, perhaps a moment where they were finally feeling safe and not so desperately afraid. In that moment, their eyes were opened and they saw who was sitting with them. And in that moment, he disappeared. And then they started talking with each other. And then they're like, oh, but didn't we kind of know without knowing? Weren't our hearts strangely warmed as he was explaining everything to us? Didn't we feel alive again? And then they rush through dinner and hurry up and leave the house and the safety in the night, because it's dark by now, and rush back to Jerusalem to tell the rest of his students what was going on. And the rest of the students are like, ah, he's been seen, the women were in the tomb, oh my gosh, because it's all happening all at once. And dude and his wife, Cleopas and Mrs. Cleopas, are like, we've seen him too, we saw him on the road, we didn't understand, but he explained everything, and we finally understand, and now we're gonna tell you. And so, the story goes on. The reason I love this story, there's lots about it that you can go into detail with and be like, but what about that? Is that miracle really true? And what about that? And did this really happen? Is this real? The thing I love about this story is that it is also a metaphor for our own lives. We don't always realize when God is walking with us in our lives. We don't always recognize when someone busts out with deep wisdom, where deep wisdom comes from, where it always comes from. we don't always see that despite our pain and our fear and our anguish and our stark terror and our existential dread, we don't always realize that into the midst of this, God has been walking with us all this time, encouraging us gently to look at it differently, to see that there's something else going on. And sometimes we have the beautiful opportunity in a moment of deep safety and profound calm to realize who's been walking with us. And sometimes we don't get that particular gift. But that God is with us. And God is walking with us on our journey. Every one of us. All the time. That gentle, quiet voice that entices us to a deeper calm, even when all the circumstances around us are encouraging us into crazy and terror. That still, small voice that draws us in and says there is another way. That is God. But it doesn't really matter what you call it. It doesn't matter. The thing that matters is if you listen. And that's the tricky part. Because putting a name on it's a lot easier than actually listening and considering its words. Considering if it's possible for you right in that moment to do and to be and to go and to stay and to say and to refrain from saying the things it bids us. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if we're not quite ready right now, because it's not going anywhere. And that is something that I take great comfort in the rough moments when I'm not ready to listen. Amen. Thank you for joining me. I am not going to take any questions today, but I am very grateful that you're here. And I'm also very grateful for my patrons. This is my thank you to my patrons moment. Thank you, patrons. You're super awesome. I love you. If you want to join my team of patrons that help me to create my novels and my digital spiritual content, I invite you to check out patreon.com/SarahLiz, SareliZ. And you can check out the different patronage tiers there. And if you just want more information about the things I'm doing or the books I'm selling, or want to ask questions in a different atmosphere, you can check me out at sarahliz.com, SareliZ.com. Thank you very much, and I will check you out next week, Sunday at 9 a.m. Bye.